Welcome to another episode of Real Sense Now. It's your host, Dawood. It's the number one podcast and radio show you want to tune into, where we pretty much cover all things real estate, entrepreneurship, and we highlight the stories of extremely interesting individuals. If you don't know anything about the show or about myself, we'd like to give you a sense of what's going on in our economy, in the world of business. And of course, I'd like to think of myself as a connoisseur of real estate and life's finest things, of course. Here on Real Sense Now, we want to present some of the challenges and the opportunities that you can take if you pivot quickly and become a market leader. More importantly, on Real Sense Now, we're here to show you the cheat code to your success. If you're tuning in for the first time, we're live every Saturday from 11 to 12 on Florida Man Radio. So let's get into it. Today, we have a special treat for you. My guest has many talents. He's an Orlando native entrepreneur now. I am pleased to welcome Mike Collin. From the beats of North London, from the drummer of the infamous 80s band, George Michael's Wham, to the leading edge of AI technology, Mike's journey has been nothing short of remarkable. I want you to stay tuned as we dive into the life of the musician turned tech visionary and discuss how he went from a musician to where he is today. Mike, thanks for being a part of the show.
Such a pleasure to be with you, Dawood.
I can promise you one thing. This show is going to be exhilarating. We're going to learn loads, and Mike has incredible stories to tell. So Mike, with this legendary background that you've had, we've talked about all of your crazy stories, and I really want the world to hear more of them. Tell us about your early days in the music industry, and more importantly, your time with Wham. I mean, that George Michael guy was a heartthrob back then. I'm sure he had all the... Was it ladies or?
Well, for the record, he wasn't a heartthrob to me. So, no, he was a ladies man, young man back then. So, it just so happened we all grew up in London in a school called Bushymead School. It was kind of like a gravitational pull for music talent. I always used to say to my mum, we're either in a band or we're in a gang. And fortunately, I was in the former. So, we all joined the band. We started as the Checkers Sedan. That was the original name.
Like the taxi cab?
We were in awe of America. Everything America, right? MTV and so forth. So Checkers Sedan seemed appropriate. That then morphed into the Executives, which later became Wham when they went kind of on their own and branched out. But, some of us legacy players got the opportunity and were blessed to continue playing with them for things like Top of the Pops, which is kind of like the version of American Bandstand, right? Yep. So Tony Savile and Tony Blackburn, all those, Jimmy Savile and Tony Blackburn, those kind of DJs. But it's fun, but it wasn't just them. In our school was people like Spandau Ballet, Duran, members of it, Mark Arman, Soft Cell. So we kind of all knew each other. We'd all play hooky or bunk from school as it was and turn up at one parent's house or another invade the garage and, borrow equipment or steal equipment or whatever it was, beg, steal or borrow and be playing. So it was a fun, joyous time growing up in London.
I would like to say that for a normal person's life, to have an episode that is so legendary like that in your life would be a life fully lived. But you've had many other chapters that morphed into greater opportunities. Talk to me about your journey in photography. How did it begin? And what was it like working on the top magazine covers of all the major magazines at the time?
No, I appreciate the question. So sometimes life allows you to proactively pivot, right? And sometimes you're dealt the hand you're dealt with. And unfortunately, at a young age, I was dealt some health challenges, which kind of prevented me from playing drums or continuing in that fashion. Trust me, Dawood, I'd still be playing drums today if I could. And there's funny stories about the times when I do play drums nowadays.
I have to hear those as well too, because you told me in the break, and I can't wait to hear this one too.
But the reality was at the time I wasn't able to continue, and I wanted to stay grounded in something artistic. When you have that kind of artistic bend in you, we were doing theatrical shows as many people did in North London, my whole entire family. I was a musician. I tried to play piano following the injuries or the illnesses that were preventing me from playing drums. And it really was another venture for me, was to look at photography as a form of art. So I kind of learned my craft of art, got a chance to do a little bit of traveling around the world and ended up in New York and then Boston doing photography. And it was really fashion photography and commercial photography, a lot of food, but also magazines, like you said, Mary Claire and Elle. I was fortunate enough to have some covers for those. And it's good to look back on those things. But, you know, the transition out of photography, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, was just as interesting as how I got into photography.
I think the best theme upon getting to know you better is one word. And I think you embody the quintessence of what this word is, which is pivot. Somehow, for as long as I've known you, you've managed to always pivot at the right time and get into another completely different industry than what you were in before. So how do you pivot from photography to consulting?
Good question. So here's an interesting thing. So I'm proud of the fact in the last few years that the pivots I've done, especially expanding my portfolio in entrepreneurship and so forth, have been my choice. I've been ahead of the curve, looking at trends, looking at market and so forth. Back in those days, I got to say, it was a lesson of hard knocks, right? I was a photographer, and photography back in those days was analog. And those with a few gray hairs probably know what I'm talking about. You'd load a film in a camera and you'd take those pictures and you'd send it off for processing. And if you're a fashion photographer, you know, it can be a laborious and hard challenge to do that, because I used to call photography back in those days pre-production, meaning if you weren't cognizant of the lighting or the makeup, the angle of the body or the food, where it was from a lighting sense, you're kind of screwed. I mean, you are what
there
you
wasn't
are.
Photoshop at the time or anything
else. There was not
else,
Photoshop, right? So now I call it the art of post-production, and it's genius. There's some people out there who are really, really, really good at it. In fact, there's some apps out there that makes it even simpler for folks to get into that style of photography. Hell, look at any smartphone, and the resolution is probably higher than the original Pentaxes I was using.
Correct.
But at the time I was doing commercial photography, I remember there was the advent of digital photography was starting in that day. And I was an old traditionalist. You know, I was the Ansel Adams of the guy. You know, I'd dig my feet into the ground and said, hell no, real photography is an art form.
Correct.
Well, you know, that's great, but if you're on a stranded island and everyone's sailing away from you with technology, you quickly learn that you've missed the boat, right? So I missed that boat in photography because I was so staunch on analog that I didn't pivot quickly enough. And that taught me a life lesson to learn to pivot, to stay ahead, see what's happening and coming up, look at the trend and get ahead of it.
It's really interesting that you segued into that, because I want to talk about how your experience in consulting, something completely different than photography, completely different than being a musician, a drummer in a band, shaped your approach to business.
Sure. I base everything on find the problem, get the best solution, the money will come, right? It starts with the business imperative or the problem. And that was kind of how it happened with the photography transition to consulting. I was doing photography. Photography was changing globally into more of a digital opportunity. I was in the US. I had an opportunity to work for a company that had some success. I wouldn't call it high photography, but it was called glamour shots at the time, which are in all of the malls, and they were taking pictures of, you know, folks in feather boas and sequins. Well, guilty as charged, right? I mean, I was working in that area, running multiple stores. The interesting thing was that I was noticing, and I suddenly was immersed in this business management of business operations. It wasn't just me taking pictures of people in malls or training people, in my case, to take pictures in malls. I was noticing that the point of sale system and the sales techniques weren't generating the revenues. I was noticing that the managers weren't trained. So I took an entrepreneurial stand and said, there's got to be a better way. So I started thinking outside the box that how could I create a sales training model for glamour shots. It was called the Blueprint for Success.
I was about to say, for the people that didn't understand the business portion or the corporate portion of what we're talking about, you pretty much helped take glamour shots all over North America,
Correct.
if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. So, because you have to have a good framework, rigor and discipline in order for it to scale, right? So this was a scalable model. And then what happened is I was sequestered by a consulting firm. A consulting firm, by that time I knew some friends through networking who were consultants, said, well, hang on a second. the work you're doing, Mike, is less technical and more tactical. You're able to move people to change and get compliance and sustainability. Is that something you'd like to get into? So I immediately pivoted into consulting, knowing that I could apply the same techniques. And I was with consulting for near 30 years, learning the craft of consulting, everything from lean manufacturing, Six Sigma, supply chain, inventory management, you name it. What a grounding consulting was for now my business acumen, because it allows me to be like a Swiss Army knife. I can pivot very quickly based on 30 years of understanding what makes you successful in a consulting arena. And it's like before I used to help the problems of businesses. Now I can look at it introspectively and say, what's the problem with the business? What's the problem with the situation, business situation, and how and what technique would I apply in order to solve it? And
essentially, you have all the tools in the metaphorical Swiss Army knife as well, too, because of the experience that you've acquired.
Yeah, I mean, I worked across a range of industries, whether it be oil and gas, mining, manufacturing, supply chain, customer service industry, healthcare, financial services. That hones that skill, right? I mean, some might say it makes you the good at many versus a master at a few. But I tend to disagree. I think that having that well-rounded understanding of business is the art of no surprises, right? Now I can adapt very quickly or see very quickly the writing on the wall for a business challenge and apply a technique that would have been applied to one of my clients.
I love it. From drumming at an early age, from the incarnation of Wham to pioneering AI-driven solutions, which we're going to be talking about, Mike is truly a testament to what is possible if you could feel the market, pivot at the right time, and embellish on yet another chapter of success in a world of business and entrepreneurship. To our listeners, keep chasing your dreams, and remember, the next big pivot could be just around the corner. Stay tuned after the break as we get into more conversation with Mike Collin. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, listeners. It's time to get real right here on Real Sense Now. It's your host, Dawood Bedrosian. Today's guest is a man who's mastered the art of pivot, Mike Collin. From setting the rhythm in London's music scene to revolutionizing health safety post-COVID. It's a very interesting story. I want to talk to you about that as well, too. Mike's story is a playbook for aspiring entrepreneurs. If you're tuning in for the first time, you're tuning in to the best show to learn something new about business, real estate, and a whole lot more. So buckle up as we explore the life of a man who's always a beat ahead. What led you? We met during COVID, for starters, and it definitely made an impression upon me in terms of the conversation we had, your business acumen, and I surely have lots to learn from you. So in many ways, I can say thank you for being a guiding light and a bit of a mentor for some of the lessons that you have shared with me. Let's talk about what led you to set up your COVID business during this time, and how did you manage to have it grow as rapidly as you did?
Well, firstly, thanks go right back to you, because believe it or not, you were the first person to really recognize the importance. And it wasn't because of the monetary aspect of COVID testing. It was because of what we were doing and how we were helping the community. And you recognize that, Dawood, and I appreciated it because you invited us on your show at the time. So I'm very, and will always be grateful for you for that. So the reality was I was in consulting, and the consulting industry died overnight. If you think about it, our jobs as consultants is to help businesses, either their top line growth or their bottom line margins. And when COVID hit, it was mass layoff time, and people are kind of hunkering down and circling the wagons and trying to think how they're going to survive the wrath. They certainly weren't hiring consultants at the time. So, like everything, I always say, he who leads the market wins the market. And we did it in a way that was strategic, which was, it wasn't the fact that COVID was happening and everyone wanted to monetize. I mean, obviously there was a monetization opportunity, but it was, as I always say, though, it was, what's the problem we have to solve? Otherwise, you're just one of the masses and you're fighting for market share. So the problem at the time was the fact that results were not happening quick enough. So if you're an employer or, God forbid, a parent who's had a child tested and you're waiting 24, 36, 48 hours for a result, or you're having to get in your car, go to a doctor's office, sit next to someone who may or may not be ill, and there was loose compliance to masks and so forth, we needed a more convenient thing to do. Kevin O'Leary on Shark Tank says there has to be a better way, and there had to be a better way. So I quickly designed a drive-through methodology similar to Chick-fil-A, right? So you pull up.
It really was like Chick-fil-A.
Right.
So I went and got tested a bunch of times, and thanks to you guys, I got my results turned around right away.
We're glad we could help. I mean, so it was literally an infamous napkin that I wrote on at Rocco's Tacos in Dr. Phillips, and I drew a schematic of what it would look like. And we deployed very quickly. I think within 11 days, we had the first fixed site. We grew to 11 fixed sites, maybe 7 mobile sites. But more so, we did the testing for UCF. And then we grew the largest account, which was with Royal Caribbean and Celebrity Cruise Lines. And we started doing for all of their testing for crew, for staff, and for passengers. So that rapidly grew. But it wasn't, again, based on the fact that, heck, look at this, let's run at an opportunity, let's monetize. It was, how can we do a better way of doing testing and apply methodologies, specifically the lean manufacturing principles I learned in consulting to drive that market?
So listeners, there's 2 things that I want to touch on that Mike alluded to. And I want to say this with clarity. And the clarity is, be the first in the market to win the market. And then secondly, understand how to pivot, find the solution, and then you will reap the rewards in whatever form it comes in. What drives your passion for diverse entrepreneurial ventures?
I think that you just mentioned it. I'm inherently a problem solver. I don't inherently wake up every morning and go, how can I make money? Or gotta hustle more. And you and I have spoken about this because I think it's one of the most overused, overabused words out there, hustle. And I'll talk about why I believe that. But I'm wired, and maybe from the consulting days, is to think, how can we do things better, faster, more efficiently, more effectively? And it doesn't have to be, the greatest invention of all time. It can be something very small, but, just that little change can cause you to create a business opportunity. And like you said, and you're spot on, it says in my office, lead the market, win the market. I've worked with a lot of people who try for, it's like analysis paralysis. They try for perfection before they go for execution. Execute. This business is about execution. You can always hone the model because it's called customer feedback, sentiment of customer, understanding where you can hone that journey. But get off your butt, move, and execute on a daily basis with rigor and discipline.
We've always heard the phrase, ready, aim, fire. I'm a bigger fan of ready, fire, and then we'll figure out where to aim afterwards. I think taking the first step, taking the plunge has always been my mantra to figure out how to maneuver and navigate once a decision has been made and you're committing to that decision. Talking about mantras, elaborate on he who leads the market wins the market, because your business stories that you're sharing with us is essentially a testament of how and why it actually works.
No, I appreciate that. So it all gets back to the art of pivot, right? You can't lead the market quickly unless you're thinking about something that the next guy's not or gal's not thinking about. So that's what I spend most of my time doing. I have operational meetings every day. I did during the COVID period and other businesses with my peers, my fellow leadership, even through my network. And I always talk about it, and people know this for me, is what's next. When I have my group of staff, I have a what's next meeting. And people go, what do you mean by that? I say every morning when we get together, I talk about what's next. And I ask for because you have to be collaborative. You can't always think about yourself as being the smartest person in the room. Smartest people are the ones that hire the smartest people, right? So get the right people around you and challenge them to think about what's next. And the reason I do that is because I say, if you come into an office this morning to talk about how we're going to perform today, that ship has sailed. If you didn't know how many resources you needed, what supply chain you needed, you should have figured that out months ago. So you should be thinking and talking about what's next? How's this market? What's the trend going to change 6 months from now, a year from now? It's why you should always be thinking about it whenever you're pivoting internally with a business. You can think, wow, this is a great idea. I'm going to do different SKUs. I'm going to change my business model. But don't expend energy and time on something that's going to be obsolete a year from now. Think ahead and think what's going to happen. Like right now, I know we're going to talk about it, generative AI or AI and ML, machine learning and deep learning. We've got to be thinking ahead. What's that going to look like, the landscape a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? Because it's here to stay. And think about that for your business. Because if you're building a business built upon analog, antiquated, traditional methodologies, you're already obsolete.
And I can tell you that in essence has, as the days go by, become increasingly more prevalent in my day-to-day business in real estate. Who would have thought AI, that seemed like a bit of a passing fad, like a lot of people thought the internet was going to be? Little did they know. I think if you're not taking advantage of all of that, whether it's solving your money problems or your problems, there's so many different ways that you could be guided with that. Before we get into AI, I definitely want you to touch on, because there's a lot of younger people out there that are obsessed with what they see on social media, and it's mostly chasing money. It's all about that hustle mentality. And we both talked about it, that your mantra actually is completely different. In your opinion, speak to the younger listeners and share your thoughts on chasing money or solving problems.
And don't get me wrong, just go on any social media platform, TikTok, Instagram, and so forth. You'll see a lot of younger folks who are advocating making money very rapidly. And I'm not going to say that's not true. To some of them, it may be true. But if you think about it, again, if you're not leading the market, you're losing the market, right? It's the opposite. So perhaps some of those folks are now pandering to folks who are followers, and those followers aren't going to make the big wealth that they think they're going to make on social media platforms and marketing and affiliate marketing and so forth, right? So ultimately, I say to people, start with the problem. If you start with a problem and solve the right problem, because it has to be the right problem, the money will come. The money should always be a consequence. If you wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to make $1 million, I would challenge you to say, okay, but what problem are you going to solve? Because you can make $10 million with the right problem. You can make $1 million if you solve the wrong problem, maybe. But find the right problem, come up with a different solution, a creative solution to how you can address that to people, make it marketable, understand the analytics so you can know that it's fiscally viable, employ or engage the right people to help you on it, because it's not a solo act. Entrepreneurship is not a solo act.
It's about collaboration, not competition.
1,000%. So understand that and then drive it hard with execution every single day. I mean, it's not a glamorous business, entrepreneurship. It's a graft, right? So but there's a difference between graft and hustle, right? For me, when I hear people say, well, we hustle, my father used to tell me this. He used to say, activity only, or keeping your nose to the grindstone only guarantees two things in life: blunt head, bad posture. Meaning you can work really, really hard, but if you haven't got the right direction and you haven't got the right rigor and discipline, it's all in vain. So just get a plan, put it together, put rigor and structure, be repetitive to it, understand your numbers, and then the money will come. But find a problem.
If somebody wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way to reach you?
Well, ironically, here I go. I'm on social media, right? So, but I could be reached through probably the easiest way is through my email, which is my company Scovinen, which we're going to talk about, Skovinen. Right. So Mike@scovinen.com.
Thank you for tuning in to Real Sense Now. What a journey it's been speaking with Mike Collin today. A true polymath in the realms of business, technology. His story reminds me of when life throws you a curveball. Not only does he know how to bat it out of the park, but he's constantly evolving and showing us that constant change is the only inevitability that we can experience in our life. Stay curious and see you right after the break. It's your host, Dawood, and you're listening to Real Sense Now. Welcome back to Real Sense Now. It's your host, Dawood. We're bringing you conversations that matter, and today's conversation is just that. Mike Collins, a man who's not just walked, but blazed trails across several unrelated industries. From capturing moments behind the camera to capturing market opportunities, Mike's life is a mosaic of innovation and entrepreneurship. Let's dive into the story of the man who turns challenges into triumphs. Mike, tell us about your newest business, Skovinen, and tell us more about the company itself and its objectives.
I appreciate you asking. So Skovinen was really founded, believe it or not, pre-COVID. But there was a hiatus during the COVID where, I pivoted, as we know, and did the testing. So post-COVID, I knew there was a chance to have a resurgence of it. So let me get back to what it really is and why I felt it was a good market opportunity. 30 years of operational consulting. Operational consulting will always have its place. Operational consulting is built upon a foundation of human behavior and change management, leadership management. So if you think about it, for sustainability and compliance, you don't just give someone a tool. I always used to say, if you give Rain Man a Ferrari, you'll just get a fast accident. Yeah. So you have to have training, right? So operational consulting firms really focus on the human behavioral aspect of it. That's great, but the challenge with that is it can take time. And in a very fast-growing, evolving business model, you can actually outrun the installation. So meaning by the time you've made sustainable change, either you've had turnover, you've had business change, you've had pivoting within that company. So the one element, the secret sauce missing, we felt, my partners and I felt missing in traditional consulting was the real integration of technology, digital technology. And I got to say, and again, I'm guilty of it for many years, it behooves operational consulting firms not to have technology, right? Because they make their money through having labor consultants be on site, on premise for a long period of time. Quite rightly, they're doing a great job, but it requires critical mass. Right. Whereas technology can be done remotely, and technology tends to circumvent the need for labor. So Skovinen recognized it and embraced that and said, okay, hang on a second. If you balance technology with operational consulting, still have specialists, senior level specialists, but provide people the right tools immediately, meaningful, manageable data that they can use and assimilate and make business decisions based, accurate business decisions, data analytics, then focus on that. There's a great synergy. So Skovinen was founded a few years ago, and my partner continued it on until I rejoined about a year ago. Skovinen, it's a portmanteau, the name, so it means random forest, and we called it random forest, which is from Norway. Random forest is a word used in machine learning. It's a term, it's a language. But in our company, the mantra of our company is random forest means, if you think about a forest, what's a forest? A forest is a collection of trees, and each have their value. So we thoroughly believe that all of our employees, all of our contractors have incredible collaborative value to the greater good of our clients. And when you bring them together, it makes a solid forest. That's random forest, random people coming together as a unified forest, and that's Skovinen. So we do a lot of work internationally right now, primarily in the supply chain. Post-COVID, people need help with supply chain, but it's also in customer service and other areas, manufacturing and so forth. We're working with a lot of companies, and we're applying very advanced in-house bespoke generative AI solutions. One of my partners is a chap called Sat Chatterjee. Sat Chatterjee is one of the world's leading proponents of artificial intelligence.
I met him.
Yeah. So we wanted to really leverage that intelligence, because a lot of consulting firms, hell, you look at LinkedIn and you believe that every consulting firm is now a genius at AI, but they're really not. They're still using, Microsoft Dynamics, BI, and so forth. So we really wanted to focus on using generative AI solutions to complement, not to overrun, but to complement traditional consulting methodologies so that you drive the maximum result for our clients.
So I think when people think of AI, they think of machine learning or ChatGPT or whatever it is. What is generative AI and how has it influenced your business approach?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So not only for...
We only ask good questions around here.
Of course you do. So not only for Skovinen, right? So you mentioned ChatGPT. Large language models are changing the face and dynamic of business as we speak, and it's going to get better. A lot of people fear from it, but trust me, you got to either upskill or reskill right now and learn it and adapt and understand how you can use it. We're using visual learning now and integrating video with AI as well. So there are a lot of things you can do to eliminate repetitive tasks. One of the companies I started along with Scobinen was a company called Data Dive. It's spelled D-A-I, like AI, Data Dive. So what Data Dive is, it allows you to assimilate millions of court records or pieces of paper into a cloud data lake, and then use a large language model like a ChatGPT to ask unstructured questions and get an answer immediately. So you might say, well, is that OCR, or, character recognition? No, because what happens is when you do OCR, it just makes a flat form of whatever you're copying, a PDF or a Word. What our system does, it's called Alstra, inside Data Dive, is it literally can read both structured data, which would be tabular data, numbers and so forth, but it also recognizes actual unstructured data like handwriting, converts it, and then lets you query against it. So we're using Data Dive in the medical industry. We're using it for lawyers right now. We're using it for real estate, ironically, and we're using it for oil and gas companies who are looking at deeds and properties. Millions and millions of records, and you can freeform text a question into it, and in less than 12 seconds, it'll give you a full response.
That is absolutely incredible. You pretty much answered my next question, which was, how have you leveraged AI into your business and other businesses that have tied this new technology into it to perform at higher levels?
Well, it's an open book if you just think about the problems. Again, if you go trying to chase what can I do with AI, then you might miss the mark. But if you say, what's the problems out there? Like one of the ones I'm really, really proud of right now, and in fact, I just got my patent issued last week on it, so I can freely talk about it and would love to share you the story on it, is a AI-based technology called PAD, Proximity Alert Detection. Here's the problem. 47% of the world's children between the ages of 1 and 5 die because of one reason. Do we know that reason? Drowning. Absolutely correct.
I would have thought that, or some kind of an accident.
Yeah. So drowning is the number one cause. So, and some people didn't realize that. But how can you prevent that drowning? So using, and we're never going to, I'm not saying that we're going to prevent all drowning, but how can we, that's a problem. So how do you solve it? So let's think about a technology using AI that can understand where the child's proximity is in relationship to water, and then alert the parent and guardian in a progressive manner. Yellow, you better be aware. Orange, the child's getting close. And red, you better take action right now. And if you don't respond after it turns red, after about 15 seconds, it's going to automatically call first responders.
So hold on a second. Is this like a wristband, a ring, a necklace? What is it?
It's multivariable. So it can be a necklace. We've designed it as a wristband at the moment. And the beauty of that using AI is it crowdsource the information. So if you go and stay at your local Hilton and someone has perimetered the pool, that goes into a data sharing system, kind of like Waze, if you know with Waze where it shares the information. Now all of a sudden another parent arrives and their child's wearing the wristband. Guess what?
They're aware.
There's a level of protection.
But I think you're also increasing social awareness and social consciousness to be able to adapt new technologies so that they become a part of our lifestyle right now.
One of them is post-COVID was, if COVID taught us one thing, it was wash your hands. Right? It was, but use better sanitation practicalities. We can believe or not believe COVID, but in essence, the transference of a virus, a bacteria, or a germ should be mitigated. And we've been really slovenly on that. So one of the things we did coming out of it, I did with another partner out of Texas, was create a device which is called CIMA, Continuous Infectious Microbial Reduction. Long word, easy to say, CIMA. So we've been using CIMA, which is an AI-based technology. We call it now CIMADome, to look and help the U.S. military. We already have active work in the U.S. military. We're looking overseas for food storage, meaning how do you mitigate viruses or weevils, et cetera, and germs, bacteria. We're looking at the healthcare service, right now. India themselves are putting in a new infrastructure, road infrastructure, an expressway. So what they do is there's concern at the highest levels that this new infrastructure will cause an increase in accidents. So they need dynamic mobile medical services to be deployed throughout India. Well, how do you keep that sanitized in rural areas? Simmer again, it's using a microbial system to eliminate bacteria and germs. So that's just one of the many things we're using AI for, or I'm using AI for right now in order to progress.
We talk about implementing AI in order to enhance your business, but a lot of people are in the entry level position where they're trying to get into a business. And one of your mantras is this collaborative approach, not competition. You know, we've all heard the phrase before, if you want to go fast, you can go alone. But if you want to go far, go with a tribe, right? Go with a group of people. What's your approach to partnerships? I mean, you've partnered with a car dealership, a snack food company, and it keeps going on and on and on. Talk to us about that.
I would always say, just like I say rigor and discipline in understanding the business, use the same rigor and discipline in understanding your partners. You know, it might be very easy to be lured by the shiny object of a partnership and think that they're a friend. You know, I got to tell you, friends don't make the best partners. Sometimes you have to have true due diligence of understanding they have the same vision, they have the same level of energy and execution that you do. So that's critically important. But I embrace using partners. I'm just very scrutinous when it comes to who I work with, because we've all made mistakes in the past. So just understand who you're working with and treat that partnership just like you treat the business. Everyone has a fiduciary responsibility. Everyone has action items, and plan actual variance. You know, make sure you're executing correctly in a unified way.
That brings me to my last question, and we have to wrap this up quickly. What are some of your misconceptions about entrepreneurship in the world that we live in today?
I think the first one would be that these entrepreneurs are pioneering risk takers. You know, my goodness gracious, they're venturing into new areas. I would personally say it's the furthest from the truth. I'm extremely diligent at my data analytics. So I'm actually risk adverse. You know, I make sure I do my analytics and understand the numbers before I get into something. It's not some cavalier effort. So that's one misconception, is that we take risks. We don't take risks. It's all calculated, right? The other one is, of course, that it's a get-rich-quick scheme. No, it's not. I mean, it takes real grind and discipline and rigor and discipline to do the business. So, you know, that we do it alone. We don't do it alone. I'm not some little pioneer at the top of the food chain. I mean, I surround myself with extremely intelligent people I either network with or work with. So those are kind of the critical things for me, is making sure that that we do our due diligence.
You know, one of my favorite mantras to live by in the world that we live in, specifically today, I say this on the show all the time, we live in a relational economy where the currency is relationships. Today, you can reach people across the globe and connect with them at whatever level that they're at. And what I've noticed in particular is that your network determines your net worth. You touched on so many great technologies, so many wonderful business principles that everyone should adopt into their business, into their approach with their families, with making friends, relationships. It applies everywhere. All principles are microcosms of everything else. What you do here, you do everywhere. So since we're talking about AI, how do you foresee AI shaping the future of this professional services industry?
Well, this is a race. I mean, it's not going away soon. It's going to shape it very, very quickly. From chatbots and virtual assistants to the assimilation of massive amounts of data, from the elimination of redundant, repetitive tasks. It's going to shape the business landscape by retooling skills, right? So people need to be thinking now ahead, what do I need to do from a skill position to be aligned with the future, because it's not going to get any easier. So it's not some wary thing to be afraid of. It's something to be embraced and think, okay, knowing it's going to go fast forward, what do I need to do to position myself and skill myself, through continuous training and so forth, so I can be prepared for it. But AI is here to stay.
But it's a daunting, overwhelming new task to take on with all the distractions and all the things that we have to do. I can't even keep up. If I was just thinking to myself when I was driving today, I want to keep one phone for everything and another phone which is literally old school, just for phone calls, so that I'm not bothered by all of the chaos. AI has helped you in your business and multiple other people, including myself, in what I do on a day-to-day
Sure.
basis. What strategy do you use for effective problem solving in business with AI?
Yeah. So first thing you need to do is truly understand what I call the business imperative, the problem. And once you understand it, you need to understand the market. You need to benchmark against it. You need to do your due diligence using AI. And that's an incredible way, positive way that AI can be leveraged is through data analytics. Next is root cause analysis. Many people address the symptom. They don't address the root cause. Right. The root cause is driven by what's called the 5 M's and an E: man, method, machine, material, measurement, environment. Those are the things that are the levers that will, once problem solved, will help you alleviate the issue. And AI can or can't be used, may or may not be used to help alleviate one or the other of the man, method, machine, material, measurement, environment. And it's not binary. It's not just man or just machine or just measurement. It can be a combination thereof. But my brain thinks in a way of, rather than thinking in generic terms, I always go, okay, what's the problem? And then I write on a whiteboard. You're probably a fan of whiteboards yourselves. I write man, method, machine, material, measurement, environment, and I Pareto it out, and then I prioritize, okay, how am I going to address it? It's like squeezing a balloon. What one is going to get reap the best result and go after that with rigor and discipline?
But at the rocket speed that the race that you're in right now, I guess the ultimate question is, in an ever-changing world that we live in, where speed seems to be at the speed of lightning, how do you stay ahead of a curve in a rapidly evolving business environment, industry, world that we live in?
You got to train yourself. It's a discipline. I mean, like I was talking to you at an earlier segment, it's kind of like the what's next syndrome. Many people aren't wired that way. They're wired in a now address the operations of today syndrome. And you have to get out of that very, very quickly. You have to start really understanding the market, start reading, start networking, start conversing in that collaborative network you talked about regarding what's next. What's the market trend? And thinking ahead. Always think ahead. You might not be perfect. You might miss the mark on what's ahead, but that's okay. At least you're starting to think and be ahead of that market. Reacting to the market will just put you behind the ball.
What has been the most challenging aspect of managing all the businesses that you have? Because we've always heard of having 8 passive sources of income, and sometimes I can't manage more than the 2.5 things that I'm working on right now.
I wish I had just 8. But time,
first world problems, ladies and gentlemen.
Time management, of course, is the first one, right? I mean, but time management is alleviated by having great people around you. If you have a team that you trust implicitly and you have fellow partners that you can rely on and you're not spoon feeding and micromanaging, that alleviates a lot of the challenges of time management. I mean, entrepreneurs, you're probably the same as me. I start at 5 every morning and I finish probably at 10, much to my wife's chagrin. But it's just a reality because, in example, for my business, part of my business, Scovenin, is over on the West Coast in Vancouver and so forth. So, and some of my clients are over in Asia and in Europe. So I lay out the day, put a plan together, and I discipline myself to focus on things over discrete parts of the day. So that's the first thing. The other one is communication. You have to be a proactive communicator. I'm not going to call myself an over communicator, but I want to make sure that everyone is aligned and everyone has transparent information. So communicate. And then the last one is understand your numbers. If you understand the numbers, it's going to be a greater path to success. And I don't mean, and here's where a lot of people get derailed as entrepreneurs or business people. They introduce themselves to me and they want to tell me and brag about their top line revenue and how big their company is. It's not how much you make, it's how much you take home. So, I always want to kind of look at their numbers, peel that onion back, look at the root cause analysis and see if they're really operating in a sound business sense that drives the best margin, the best opportunity for them. You can actually make less money on the top and take home a larger paycheck yourself if you execute effectively.
What has been your most rewarding experience that you've had as an entrepreneur?
For me, it's solving the problems that I think are going to be legacy changes. I'm most proud of PAD, proximity alert detection. I mean, if I can leave something that in any way influences the outcome of infant mortality, I'm going to be proud of that, and I'm hopeful and I'm very confident that it will be. So it's not about which car I drove. We've all been blessed to have some nice cars now and some nice trimmings and trappings.
I think you've had some of the best cars in town.
I appreciate it, but that shouldn't be the mark. What you wear and what you drive shouldn't be the mark of success. What the mark of success ultimately is how someone looks at you and says, "Wow, they did a great job of influencing the community, helping the world, and making a difference."
Final question that I like to ask my guests. Tells me a lot about who they are, what their inspirations are, and what they would like to strive towards. If you could have dinner with 3 people, dead or alive, who would they be?
Wow, what a great question. I honestly think the first one would be probably Prince, or now King Charles.
Okay. Really?
Yeah, I really want to kind of understand behind that. We've all seen The Crown, right?
The
Crown.
Excellent.
I really want to kind of understand, because you think about that business, it's a business for them, that business strategy and how they think every day and how they are able to influence and address and move the dynamics of. So I'd love to kind of understand and peel the onion.
It's actually interesting because before you could rule by power and force. Now it's influence and charisma, essentially.
It's influence and charisma. So I'd love to, and especially him, I'd like to understand, because of course, from a branding, he's gone through the sublime to the ridiculous, right? So I'd love to understand and spend some time and maybe just converse with him as to how he's going to position himself, because he's in a limbo state where everyone's waiting for the next heir apparent. So I'd love to. The other two, that's a really, really, really great question. I'm sure there's business leaders I would love to speak to. I'd love to have dinner with Elon Musk, right? To kind of understand.
That's a good second one.
I'd love to understand. Obviously, we're in a space where he uses AI, open source, and so forth. So I think that would be a fascinating conversation. Just if I could just pick his brain again, that power of network. I'm not quite sure about the other one. I think probably some musician.
Anybody that comes to mind?
Yeah, someone like a Mick Jagger or Paul McCartney. I think that I miss those days, to be perfectly honest. Different calling, different time, different circumstances, a different pivot. But it would be certainly interesting to really kind of understand, like Elton John. I'd love to have an understanding of how they made that life change and that journey and generated that kind of success and sustainability.
Fascinating. Thank you for joining us on the show, Mike. It's conversations like these that essentially shape a new mindset and help people change the world. Thank you for being a guest of my show. You're listening to Real Sense Now with your host, Dawood Bedrosian. If you would like to ask me a real estate or an entrepreneurship question, you can always reach me on any one of my social media platforms. That's LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook by simply typing in my name, Dawood Bedrosian. And then you can also follow us on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And we look forward to you tuning into our show every single week. Thank you for joining. It's your host, Dawood Bedrosian.